The first thing the SEAL noticed about her was how calm she was, not the rehearsed calm of someone pretending not to be afraid, but the kind that sat deep in the bones, steady and unshakable, the kind you only saw in people who had already made peace with death long before it came knocking, and that alone irritated Chief Petty Officer Ryan Cross because nothing about this valley in eastern Afghanistan in the middle of the night deserved calm. Not the mortar fire walking closer with each impact. Not the radio chatter breaking into static, not the smell of burned cordite and blood mixing with the dust, not the way half his team was pinned down behind a shattered mud wall while insurgents poured fire from the ridgeline like they owned the mountain, yet there she was kneeling in the dirt beside a wounded operator, sleeves rolled up, hands slick with someone else's blood, eyes focused like the world had narrowed to nothing but the rise and fall of the man's chest, and Cross remembered. Thinking with a flicker of disbelief that command really had sent a nurse into this mess, a support asset, a last-minute attach meant to stabilize casualties until medevac arrived, except the medevac bird was already down, burning somewhere beyond the ridge, and this fight was turning into something else entirely, something ugly and personal. He barked at her to get lower as a round snapped overhead, but she didn't flinch, didn't even look up, just tightened the tourniquet another inch until the bleeding slowed, jaw set, breath even, and that was when Cross caught the patch on her sleeve, a simple red cross over muted camo, and felt a strange mix of irritation and protectiveness because nurses didn't belong this close to the line. Not when bullets were finding flesh with terrifying accuracy, not when the enemy had elevation and numbers and the night was tearing itself apart with gunfire, and yet she was here, and she was working like she had trained for this exact moment her whole life. Someone yelled that ammo was running low on the left flank, someone else screamed as shrapnel tore through the wall, and Cross fired controlled bursts up the slope, counting rounds, feeling the familiar narrowing of thought that came when survival was measured in seconds and inches, and through it all the nurse stayed crouched, finishing her work, slapping a pressure bandage into place, injecting something into the wounded man's thigh with hands that never shook, and when she finally looked up, her eyes met Cross's for a brief moment, and there was no fear there, only assessment, like she was already cataloging what came next. "He'll hold for now," she said, voice raised but steady, cutting through the chaos, "but if we don't move him in 10 minutes, he won't," and Cross wanted to tell her 10 minutes was a luxury they didn't have, that they were lucky to have 10 seconds, but before he could respond another explosion rocked the ground, closer this time, throwing dirt and sparks into the air, and the team instinctively ducked as fragments whined past, and when Cross looked back the nurse was already shifting position, dragging the wounded operator into deeper cover with a strength that surprised him, teeth clenched, boots digging into the dirt, and something about the way she moved, efficient, practiced, fearless, scratched at the back of his mind. Over the radio, command crackled with half-formed orders, talk of extraction reroutes, of enemy reinforcements converging, of a window closing fast, and Cross felt the cold realization settle in his gut that this mission, which had been a simple snatch and grab on paper, had turned into a fight for survival, and survival meant hard choices. He glanced at the nurse again as she secured the wounded man behind cover, checked his airway one last time, then reached for her pack, and when she pulled out extra magazines instead of medical supplies, Cross froze for a fraction of a second, brain refusing to process what his eyes were seeing, because nurses didn't carry rifle mags, not loaded ones, not with the casual familiarity of someone who knew exactly how many rounds were left in each. She caught his look and for the first time a flicker of something crossed her face, not guilt, not fear, but something like resignation, as if she had always known this moment would come sooner or later, and she leaned closer so only he could hear her over the gunfire and said, "I was hoping it wouldn't come to this," and before Cross could ask what the hell that meant, a shout went up from the right flank that they were being overrun. Shadows moving fast through the rocks, too close, too many. And instinct took over as Cross swung his rifle and fired, muzzle flash lighting the night, tracers cutting arcs through the darkness, and when he looked back again the nurse was reaching for a rifle lying in the dirt beside a fallen operator, fingers closing around the grip with absolute certainty, like it belonged there, like it had always been hers. The rifle came up into her shoulder with a familiarity that hit Cross harder than the incoming rounds, not clumsy or hesitant but smooth and deliberate, stock seated, cheek welded, safety flicked off in one practiced motion, and for a split second he forgot to breathe because he had seen that movement thousands of times, and it only came from people who had lived with a weapon long enough for it to become an extension of their body, not something you learned in a crash course or a range qualification. And the disbelief burned hot in his chest as she leaned out just enough to see, just enough to shoot, and squeezed off 2 controlled shots that cracked through the night and dropped a rushing silhouette mid-stride, the body tumbling down the slope as if the mountain itself had rejected it. No spray, no panic, no wasted rounds, just efficiency, and Cross felt something shift in the fight, like the ground under their boots had firmed up by a fraction, like chaos had just met resistance. "Contact right, 50 meters, she called, voice sharp and clear, already adjusting her stance, and Cross realized with a jolt that she wasn't reacting, she was leading, calling targets with the same clipped authority he expected from seasoned operators, and the team responded instinctively, trusting the call without even knowing why, rifle swinging, fire converging, and the rush on the right flank stalled under the sudden accuracy. The radio screamed again, a panicked voice reporting movement behind them, and before Cross could spin, the nurse, no, not just a nurse anymore, shifted positions, rolling to one knee, bracing against the wall, and sent another tight burst uphill that cut down a figure silhouetted against the faint starlight, the recoil controlled, the rhythm perfect, and Cross tasted copper as adrenaline surged because this was impossible and undeniable at the same time. Between volleys she moved, reloading without looking, counting under her breath, checking angles, her awareness expanding beyond the wounded man she had been treating to encompass the entire battlefield, and Cross realized with a strange, dawning clarity that she had been holding something back until now, a restraint born not of fear but of choice. "Who the hell are you?" he shouted between bursts, more accusation than question, and she didn't look at him as she answered, eyes locked downrange, "Right now. I'm the difference between you getting out of here and this valley becoming your grave," and something in the way she said it, flat, unromantic, brutally honest, cut through Cross's skepticism like a blade. An RPG screamed overhead and detonated against the ridge behind them, showering the position with debris, and as the team ducked, she moved again, grabbing another operator by his vest and hauling him into a better firing position, shouting at him to cover left, to conserve ammo, to breathe, her commands precise, effective, and Cross found himself following her lead without realizing when the shift had happened.